Good evening. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Reviews. Reviews. Tonight, we will discuss Tony Scott's 1983 film, The Hunger. Ridley Scott's little brother Tony was best known for directing films such as these. But he started his Hollywood career with a super artsy weird vampire movie. I'm dead, I'm dead, I'm dead. Did you know that he was an Anne Rice fan and he really wanted to direct the up-and-coming Interview with a Vampire movie? But instead, his interest in vampires led MGM to bring him on to direct The Hunger. Now, the film and the 1981 novel it's based on are credited with reinventing the vampire genre. Because, as we all know, the vampire genre must be reinvented about every 5 years or so, but you can't really claim a film that just did something different with vampires actually reinvented it if it didn't really succeed or have any impact. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you may have picked up on the fact that I am a bit of an Anne Rice fan myself. Just a bit, you know, a little. She's okay. And you'll know that I give credit to Interview with the Vampire for the hugest pop culture tonal shift in vampire tropes. Both The Hunger and Interview and the books they're based on show sensitive, emotional vampires and are stories from the vampires' points of view, focusing on their internal struggles instead of on human protagonists. This being the reinvention from the classic impersonal monsters or dark evil seducers. Interview did it first in the novel, but Hunger did it first on screen, and films like these always have bigger cultural influence than books. So why then didn't The Hunger succeed in having a lasting impact? Every major film that came after it went back to the old style of vampires pretty much until Interview came along 11 years later. Why did the Interview film work to change the landscape of vampire media while The Hunger flopped and is at best considered a cult favorite? Because it's artsy and weird and confusing. It's slow and dreamy and moody, and the artsiness gets in the way of the story. Style over substance. You really have to watch it twice to truly understand what's going on. After the movie failed, Tony Scott went on to direct car commercials, which led him into the action genre. No more art films for him. And even as an artsy film, it's not really that deep. Cutaway shots of the Doctor's violent science monkeys while the vampires are killing represent their savage wildness. Venetian blind shadows are everywhere. But what do they mean? Duality of humanity's light and dark sides? Peering out through the cage of society? Crossing over from mortality to the unnatural? I've never seen Venetian blind shadows used as effectively as in the Joy Luck Club for tiger symbolism in one very key shot.
I am waiting like a tiger in the trees.
But here, they're just superfluous, and everyone's backlit all the time, 'cause people, even vampire people, are complex, don't you know? So artsy, you guys. Look, I can do that too. There. Now, I'm complex.
Thank you.
But enough about the lighting. We're here to talk about the vampires. Yes, these vampires are different. They're glamorous and sophisticated, which was fresh at the time. They're also based in science, which we hadn't really seen since the I Am Legend adaptations. The way vampires work in this universe is that they are a different species from humans. They stop aging once they reach maturity, and then will never die unless they get killed. Miriam, played by Catherine Deneuve, is the only example of an actual vampire we see, and she is 6,000 years old. She's lived very carefully. To keep from being lonely, she shares her blood with a chosen human lover, who then becomes a vampire in our more traditional understanding of the monster. They retain their youth and hunger for human blood, which they must have once a week or they go mad. They don't have fangs, but they use knives and cute little ankh necklaces. How symbolic. Goths everywhere rejoice.
You know, it was the symbol of everlasting life.
And they don't have a problem with daylight. They just have to be sure to sleep for 6 hours every 24. Seems like a pretty good deal.
You will sleep 6 hours in every 24.
You will fit 1 day in 7, and from this moment you will never grow old.
Not a minute.
I'm just curious why, if she's from ancient Egypt, she has a French accent? But the twist is that for the human converts, it's not permanent. After a few hundred years, their aging suddenly catches up to them, but they still don't die. And Miriam can't bear to kill those she loves, so she instead puts their conscious mummy bodies into coffins in her attic and keeps them forever. Because that's so much more compassionate? I guess when you're 6,000 years old, you get a little bit messed up. So, this is fresh. Here we have ancient Egyptian vampires before Anne Rice put it in her Vampire Chronicles sequels. And with the sci-fi twist, Miriam's blood is different, and when she infects a human, their blood is taken over by pathogens, which cause the transformation and ultimately the aging. This is conveniently expositioned by the doctor's studies of aging and insomnia using her monkey test subjects. It's not supernatural and not technically immortality, it's longevity. The film is perhaps most famous now for featuring the late, great David Bowie. Oh yeah, 1980s David Bowie. So sexy, so... Interesting use of your Bowie movie. He plays John, Miriam's abruptly aging companion, a truly tragic figure.
I'm a young man. Do you understand? I'm a young man.
Like all her past lovers, he's reached the end of his prolonged youth. They look to modern science to save him, but it doesn't go anywhere. The film slowly unveils the horror of his fate. You think it can't get any worse, and then it does. And then it does. And your heart breaks for him, and you want to hate Miriam. But then, you see how she grieves. How deeply she does love her companions, and you're like, wait, who is the bad guy in the story anyway? A vampire movie without a true villain? How am I supposed to feel about this? So deep, you guys.
You'll be back. When the hunger hurts so much you've lost all reason, then you have to feed.
The eponymous hunger is the bloodlust, of course. There was a TV show spin-off, a very loose spin-off with the same name 14 years later that paralleled the bloodlust to actual lust and focused on sexuality as an essential part of life, explored through horror shorts in the style of an erotic Outer Limits or Twilight Zone.
I'm going to bring someone to you. Someone who can feed your hunger.
But in the original film, the hunger for blood serves instead as a metaphor for Miriam's desperate thirst for companionship. She is not cold and callous. Like all good femme fatales, she's misunderstood and has a secret soft side. She needs someone to share her tortured existence with or she'll go mad. She needs connection. As do we all. Why won't Elvira return my calls? I'm so lonely. Miriam's next choice for companion is Dr. Sarah, played by Susan Sarandon. It's implied that she wants to use Sarah to help save John, but then never does anything about it before it's far too late, and Miriam seems to forget about John kind of quickly in her attraction to Sarah. She also gets right over losing the kid she'd been grooming as a replacement. For a movie that's so slow, this is one aspect that feels rushed. It makes such a big deal of her grief and mourning, but then she's over it. Is that a fault of the filmmaking, or are we to reconsider Miriam's humanity? Maybe she's a bit more unfeeling than we hoped. Or is she just so desperate not to be lonely that she rushes to fill her void and replace her lover? Like an addict needing a fix. This is paralleled in how the bloodlust is framed as an addiction. When they're hungry, their withdrawals mirror drug withdrawals. In the early 80s, addiction was a hot topic. As a morality tale, the film poses the question, would you want to live forever if you were an addict? John and Miriam choose that, but Sarah chooses not to. She kills herself and Miriam rather than face that future. But Maven, I hear you saying, what about the ending where, surprise, Sarah's not dead after all, and now she's the new Miriam and Miriam's a mummy in the attic? That doesn't count. The film originally ended with both of them being destroyed, but then the studio made them tack on this last scene so that they could have sequel bait. And there were never any sequels. There were sequels to the original novel 20 years later, but without Sarah. The new ending is twisted and tragic, but the message of the film would have been so much more powerful if Sarah was left to make her choice to die successfully.
Stay with me. I can't.
The choice against the hunger, the addiction, her strength. Speaking of strength, let's talk about women. There are some powerful feminist ideas in this film. I've heard Miriam compared to Carmilla, the original lesbian vampire, but she has much more in common with the noir-style femme fatale than the sweet, innocent maiden of Carmilla. Both vampire Miriam and human Sarah are depicted as powerful and intelligent. Miriam is a strong, badass seducer, and Sarah is a serious scientist, but they're also both allowed to be vulnerable. There's no element of having to prove that they're not like the other girls by rejecting femininity to make them strong. But more than that, they are also shown as having the same desires as men, and they are not punished for that. They are sex positive without being demonized or victimized for their lust. Instead, they're punished for addiction, which is balanced with the men in the movie. Miriam plays the flower duet from Lakme for Sarah.
Is it a love song? I told you. It was sung by two women.
Sounds like a love song.
It's a song about a lady and her slave picking flowers. That's all it is. But it's so often used as a romantic song in films and commercials because it just sounds sexy. It's a great example of how the power of music can bring subtextual eroticism to an entirely innocent subject, though with the opera's characters, there's none of that. But if we were going to headcanon slashy romantic seduction into the song, the interesting aspect in context is the power dynamic between the two women. Lakme and her slave. Similar to a vampire and a human. Sarah's insistence on it being a love song makes it clear that she's open to romance between women, which gives Miriam consent for seduction.
Are you making a pass at me, Mrs. Bladdock?
Susan Sarandon actually requested the script be changed for this scene. Sarah was supposed to be drunk when she was seduced, but Susan Sarandon wanted it to be consensual. She didn't believe the bisexuality of her character needed to be excused as a drunken mistake. She was willing to be bolder in this decision than the script. Go her! However, despite how well-rounded these female characters are built up, the film completely undermines any feminism when it reduces them to visual objects during its infamous sex scene. Now, it would be nice if we could call this an exciting, empowering representation of queer characters. However, the entire scene is shot for the male gaze. No, not the male gaze, the male gaze. The camera gratuitously focuses on the women's bodies, not their emotions. Here we have gauzy, billowy curtains, as all 80s film sex scenes must have to give it that softcore vibe, and we can barely see their faces or eyes because of the fabric or they're in silhouette. Is that bed backlit? Do they sleep on a light table? Seems odd for a vampire. The scene is shot from above. From outside, the camera is a voyeur. We lose the connection between the lovers in exchange for titillating girl-on-girl action. Where's the communication? The idea of consent is lost when Miriam bites Sarah to drink her blood, but it's confusing. Why isn't this a bigger deal? Does Sarah not notice? Why isn't there a moment when she reacts to this transition from sex to blood? Where's the beat where Sarah decides that she does want to drink Miriam's blood too? That she understands? If the camera would just let us see these fabulous actors' faces, this could be conveyed without words, but those damn curtains are in the way because apparently the film thought the audience wanted to feel like peeping toms instead of connecting to the characters' feelings. And the sex scene wasn't the only gratuitous aspect of the film. David Bowie called it perversely bloody, and Roger Ebert called it an agonizingly bad vampire movie. Apparently, an artsy, wannabe, deep depiction of glamorous, classy, sophisticated, mysterious vampires doesn't mesh well with them crawling around in buckets of gore. I don't know if it ever could have been spectacular, but there are so many promising bits to it that it's deeply disappointing that it's tonally inconsistent. And that, on top of being slow and confusing, The Hunger sadly does not go down in history as one of the greats. Because there are so many great vampire films out there.
Stop it.
Look at me.
Watch it for the superb acting, watch it for the William Dafoe cameo, watch it for times, because you'll have to figure out what all the random cutaway shots of monkeys in tension are metaphorically implying. Or go watch something better. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and I too hunger. Yeah, I could really go for... Spawn! Fetch me a rare steak and a Bloody Mary.
No. We're all sick.
I'm sending you back to Minion School.
Hungry.